Welcome to Delta Wings Aviation Academy, where we prepare you for takeoff.
Hello, pilots. Welcome to Delta Wing Aviation Academy, where we prepare you for takeoff. In this regulation-focused video from our Private Pilot series, we'll be covering the Private Pilot Airplane Airman Certification Standards, specifically Task A, Pilot Qualifications. Today's focus is PA.I.A.K2, Privileges and Limitations for Private Pilots. We'll break down two main critical FAA regulations every pilot must understand. FAR 61-113, Privileges and Limitations for a Private Pilot Acting as Pilot in Command, PIC. FAR 61-117, Privileges and Limitations for a Private Pilot Acting as Second in Command, SIC. Throughout this video, the exact FAA regulations will be displayed on the screen, so feel free to pause, read carefully, or take screenshots at any time. We'll break down each privilege and limitation step by step using simple explanations, real examples, and checkride-ready tips, with nothing missed. If you're short on time, stay tuned until the end for a quick wrap-up summary. If you find this video helpful, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us continue delivering clear, FAA-accurate aviation education. All right, pilot, let's begin. What is a private pilot certificate? Before discussing the regulations, let's first understand what a private pilot certificate actually allows you to do. The private pilot certificate is the most common pilot certificate. It allows a pilot to act as PIC of an aircraft for non-commercial purposes. That means you can fly for personal reasons, carry passengers, fly for a business purpose as long as you are not compensated. But the key point to always remember is this: you may not be paid to fly. Now that we understand the basic idea of a private pilot certificate, let's look more closely at the regulation that defines these privileges and limitations. FAR 61-113, Private Pilot Privileges and Limitations, PIC. We'll start with the most important regulation for private pilots, FAR 61-113. This regulation explains what a private pilot can and cannot do when acting as pilot in command. Let's go through it step by step. FAR 61-113, Alpha. A private pilot may not act as pilot in command of an aircraft for compensation or hire, and may not carry passengers or property for compensation or hire. In simple terms, this means you cannot be paid to fly an airplane, and you cannot operate flights where passengers or cargo are paying for the service. Even if the aircraft owner offers you money or any valuable item, that would still count as compensation. Checkride tip. A designated pilot examiner might ask something like this: if you flew from Gainesville Regional Airport, GNV, to St. Augustine Airport, SGJ, with your friend and he gave you chocolate or a Costco voucher, could you accept it? The correct answer is no. Remember, compensation is not only money. Compensation can include anything of value such as gifts, vouchers, discounts, free services, even chocolate. If you receive anything valuable in exchange for flying, the FAA considers that compensation. The DPE might ask, what does compensation mean under FAA regulations? Answer: compensation means anything of value received in exchange for acting as a pilot, including money, gifts, discounts, or services. Now that we understand the basic restriction, let's move to the next important exception in the regulation. FAR 61-113, Bravo. This section explains a situation where a private pilot can be paid, but only under very specific conditions. A private pilot may act as PIC for compensation or hire in connection with a business if the flight is incidental to the business. The flight does not carry passengers or property for compensation. So what does incidental to a business mean? It means the pilot's primary job is something else, and the flight is simply part of performing that job. For example, a company engineer might fly themselves to inspect equipment at another company location. They are being paid as an engineer, not as a pilot. However, they cannot transport passengers or cargo for the company in exchange for money. Checkride tip. A DPE might ask, what counts as property under this regulation? Property generally means cargo or items being transported. Examples include packages, equipment, company goods, supplies. If you are carrying items for someone else in exchange for money or value, that would violate the regulation. The DPE might ask, can a private pilot fly for a business? Answer, yes, but only if the flight is incidental to the business and the pilot is not carrying passengers or property for compensation. Now let's move to one of the most commonly tested rules on the private pilot checkride. FAR 61-113 Charlie, pro rata share. This regulation explains how a private pilot can share flight expenses with passengers. A private pilot may not pay less than the pro rata share of the operating expenses of a flight, provided the expenses include only fuel, oil, airport expenditures, rental fees. You may not charge passengers for maintenance, lodging, food, aircraft ownership costs. Only direct operating costs can be shared. What does pro rata mean? Pro rata means each person pays their fair share of the operating costs. The cost is divided equally among everyone on board, including the pilot. Example scenario. Let's say the flight goes from Gainesville Regional Airport, GNV, to St. Augustine Airport, SGJ. There are one pilot and two passengers. That means 3 people total. Sector 1, GNV to SGJ. 3 people on board. The costs must be split 3 ways. Each person pays 1/3 of the operating costs. This follows the pro rata rule. Sector 2, SGJ to GNV, return ferry flight. Now imagine the passengers stay in St. Augustine and only the pilot returns to Gainesville. No passengers on board. That means there is no one to share costs with. So the pilot must pay 100% of the operating costs for the return leg. The DPE might ask, can a private pilot pay less than the passengers? Answer, no. The pilot must pay at least their pro rata share of the operating expenses. Now let's continue through the remaining special exceptions in the regulation. FAR 61-113 Delta. A private pilot may act as PIC for charitable or non-profit flights conducted under FAR 91-146. These flights are usually organized by approved charitable organizations. The DPE might ask, can a private pilot fly charity flights? Answer, yes, as long as the operation complies with FAR 91-146 and the pilot meets the required qualifications. FAR 61-113 Echo. A private pilot may be reimbursed for expenses related to search and location operations, provided the reimbursement covers only fuel, oil, airport fees, or rental fees. The operation is controlled by a state or federal agency or an authorized search organization. Checkride tip. Some pilots say search and rescue, but the FAA wording in the regulation is search and location. Using the correct wording during your checkride shows the examiner you understand the regulation. The DPE might ask, can a private pilot be reimbursed for search operations? Answer, yes, but only for fuel, oil, airport expenses, or rental fees, and the operation must be authorized by a government agency or approved organization. FAR 61-113 Foxtrot. A private pilot with at least 200 hours of flight time may demonstrate an aircraft to a potential buyer. This means a pilot can fly with a customer who is considering purchasing the aircraft. The DPE might ask, when can a private pilot perform an aircraft sales demonstration? Answer, when the pilot has at least 200 hours of logged flight time. FAR 61-113 Golf. A private pilot may act as PIC for glider or ultralight towing, provided they meet the requirements of FAR 61-69. FAR 61-113 Hotel. A private pilot may conduct production flight tests for light sport aircraft certification if the aircraft is a powered parachute or weight shift control aircraft. The pilot has at least 100 hours in that category and class. The pilot is familiar with production flight test procedures. FAR 61-113 India. A private pilot may operate without a medical certificate under Basic Med if they meet the Basic Med eligibility requirements. For more information on Basic Med, refer to our video covering Advisory Circular AC 68-1A. Now that we've covered the PIC privileges and limitations, let's move to another regulation that is sometimes misunderstood by private pilots. FAR 61-117, Second-in-Command SIC. FAR 61-117 explains when a private pilot may act as second-in-command, also known as SIC. Some aircraft are designed to be operated by two pilots, such as business jets, airline-style aircraft, aircraft that require two pilots by type certificate. These aircraft typically have a captain, PIC, a first officer, SIC. What the regulation states: a private pilot cannot act as SIC in an aircraft that requires more than one pilot if the flight is for compensation or hire, or the flight is carrying passengers or property for compensation. What this means in simple terms: a private pilot can act as PIC in a two-pilot aircraft if they meet all requirements. But a private pilot cannot act as SIC in that aircraft if the flight is paid, the passengers are paying customers, the aircraft is carrying cargo for hire. Why this rule exists? This rule ensures that paid operations are conducted by properly qualified pilots. Complex aircraft are operated safely. Commercial operations are performed by commercial-rated pilots. Example: imagine you're a private pilot and someone asks you to sit in the co-pilot seat of a business jet. If that flight is a paid charter, you cannot act as SIC. That job requires a commercial pilot certificate. The DPE might ask, can a private pilot act as SIC in a business jet? Answer: not if the flight involves compensation or hire, or paying passengers or cargo. Wrap up and Checkride tip. That concludes today's video on private pilot privileges and limitations under FAR 61.113, Pilot in Command. Privileges and limitations FAR 61.117, Second in Command. Privileges and limitations. Summary and what you must know. A private pilot is allowed to act as pilot in command, carry passengers, share operating costs pro rata, fly charity flights, participate in search and location operations, conduct aircraft sales demonstrations with 200 hours, operate under Basic Med if eligible. A private pilot cannot be paid to fly, carry passengers or cargo for compensation, pay less than their pro rata share, charge passengers for maintenance, lodging, or food, act as SIC in aircraft requiring two pilots for compensated operations. Checkride tip: if the examiner asks, what are the privileges of a private pilot? You should confidently answer, a private pilot may act as PIC for non-commercial operations, carry passengers, share operating costs pro rata, and fly charity or search and location flights. They may not be compensated beyond pro rata costs and cannot act as SIC in aircraft requiring more than one pilot. Thanks for watching, pilots. If this helped you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps us continue creating clear, FAA accurate aviation education. Fly safe, and I'll see you in the next video.